On today's episode, we'll learn about why females shouldn't be proficient at defending themselves, learn that violence didn't exist among native nations prior to white contact, explore the mind of someone who wishes cancer upon others, and finally, discover that our rights are, in fact, up for discussion. This is Cringe Post. Hello and welcome to the Cringe Post podcast. My name's Britt.
And I'm Donald.
And we're here to take on those online takes that you might see in your feed and you're like, there's something wrong with this, or this is kind of weird, but I don't necessarily have an answer for it. And I know our job is to kind of debunk that. So we've got a bunch of different cringes lined up today. But before we get into those, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast. We've kind of been growing pretty fast, which has been awesome. We've got, I think, somewhere between like 30 to 40 listeners now for every episode. And so the more you guys share it, the more you guys like and subscribe it, the more it helps us out. And the more we can kind of start taking these things apart and showing them to more people and getting more people educated on what's going on in the world. So yeah, we're going to get into our show now. But before we do that, we usually like to poke fun at ourselves. And today, we're going to poke fun at Donnie. And, this one's kind of a little bit less... I mean, no, it is just as cringy. It's not your post, but you shared it. So that means that you thought it was awesome or there was some merit to it. And you shared a Mike Huckabee post from 2012. So this is what Mike Huckabee wrote, and this is what Donnie thought he should share to the world. Mike Huckabee wrote, July 13th, 2012, Mitt Romney's speech to the NAACP wasn't to his friendliest crowd, but it may be his finest moment so far. The temptation for politicians faced with a skeptical crowd is to pander, but Romney gave it to the NAACP straight. He said that Obama had made life worse for African Americans in almost every way. Their jobless rates, duration of unemployment, average income, and family wealth are all worse. He said if he didn't honestly believe his leadership and policies, like giving parents choice to give their kids out of bad schools, would make things better for families of all colors, he wouldn't be running. And when he got a little booing for saying he'd repeal Obamacare, he repeated the pledge, saying it had to be done to create jobs. By the end, he might not have earned their votes, but he'd earned their respect and a standing ovation. Worse for Obama, maybe made him think twice. For more on the Huckabee Report, visit MikeHuckabee.com.
For more bad takes like this. And I just thought that, wow, gotta share that. That one is, I mean, that... For one thing, I think it shows how almost like self-deluded we were. I mean, one of the first bad posts of yours we took apart was the, Romney wins, the partisanship really is this very self-inculcated silo where you just are like, oh yeah, everything I see through my lens is right. And like, everything is a winning move and my guy's going to win. And that's one thing. But I mean, almost everything listed here, even if I agree with the outcome, it's almost always in like the worst possible way. Because it's like, he's like, Obama had made life worse for African Americans. Okay, first of all, it's like, yeah, I'm sure it's all just dependent on the single politician, the single president in office, not the, decades of past, almost monolithic rule from the elites. And like, you think there's a big difference between Obama and Bush Senior and Clinton, etc. Like, come on, they all enforced the war on drugs. They all did all, these things that actually hurt. So it's like, okay, there's really no, the jobless rates, duration of unemployment, etc. It's like, okay. Like, I'm sure that's all just Obama's fault, nothing to do with the machine around him. And then of course, he says things like, for saying booing for he'd repeal Obamacare, he repeated the pledge saying it had to be done to create jobs. Like, what a principled stand, like you're defending my rights because it's a job creation tool.
I mean, imagine history is not kind to anything that was like pro-Romney, because imagine like now looking backwards and being able to say like, ooh, Romney's got a spine. It's just like, oh my God. Like, he's like the squishiest, slimiest Republican. Like, if you were a Republican or conservative, like, Romney's not a strong person.
No.
He's a weak person. Huckabee, man, he's just like full of cringe too. I remember there was this band that I really liked and they were on his show and like, cause he had like artist play or whatever. And maybe I've shared this before, but I just thought it was so cringe because, like, Mike Huckabee had to, like, also play music with the guests. Like he would play bass. Like he had to be like, oh, I'm like such a Renaissance man. I'm a part of all these different things. So he'd play bass with them, and it was very obvious he wasn't actually playing the notes because it was just so cringe, dude. Like he's just a cringe. He's a cringe. Like, yeah, he's just bad.
Well, and the thing is, he tries to, I don't know, phrase these little, diatribes like they're these kind of witty little short stories, and like, worse for Obama, maybe he made them think twice. And then you look at like the Trump beating Romney's black ratings and stuff like that, like by proportion and stuff. It's just kind of funny because it's like, no, it didn't make them think twice.
But you loved it. Back in 2012, you loved it enough to share it. So
in 2012, I'm like, Mike Huckabee is making a good point, and this is why we need to support Mitt Romney. And I didn't like Mitt Romney, for the record. He wasn't my first choice, but I was like, well, we got to do what we got to do.
Got to vote R.
Absolutely. Well, R for Romney and Republican.
There you go. All right, moving on to our normal cringes here. So we've got a meme, and it's a picture of a train for those of you listening, and it says, "I don't want self-driving cars. I want boring things like public transit that comes so regularly I don't need to check a schedule. I want fast passenger rails so accessible and easy it's preferable to suffering airports. I want cities that aren't built around cars as default."
There's a lot, and I wonder... I feel like this is the kind of post that a lot of different people could share because of for like different specific things and reasons. But all of it to me speaks from a very interestingly, almost like, and I hate to use this language, and I don't mean it in the same way that intersectionalists do, but a very privileged position. Do you know what I mean? Where it strikes me as like, I want something that... the city isn't catered towards people doing individual things, being able to accommodate their schedules and wanting to drive. I want it to be on, everything is accessible to me through this rail that everyone has to use and go on. And it's, I don't know, like that's what it strikes me as just on the first blow without even really taking it apart. It just strikes me as kind of like selfish and privileged, like everyone lives in the city and that self-driving cars aren't going to benefit like people's individual lives and schedules like this would. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like okay, like you might not want self-driving cars, but apparently the rest of us all do. But if you want all this public transit and all these things, okay, go pay for it. Spend the millions and billions of dollars to do it, or convince other people that they should do it. But apparently, people have been trying to do this forever, and they've never really been successful at it. I think about like in Seattle when they like quoted like the bike lanes or whatever. And it was like, I can't remember what it exactly was, but I think it was like $1 million or something like that per mile of bike lanes that they're going to put into downtown Seattle. And like, it was supposed to be like a 2-year project. And they started implementing it, and it ended up being like 5 or 6 years. And it went from $1 million to like $20 million a mile. Like it was insane, like how much it blew up. And it's like, man, this isn't a feasible project, right? Like, it wouldn't be feasible in any private sense or voluntary sense of the matter. Like, you couldn't convince people to say, hey, I'm going to pay $20 million per mile of bike lane. And it's the same thing with, like, public transit, right? Like, it's just the technology and the will and the desire and the market forces aren't there to convince people to do it. And it's just, anytime you do it, it's just going to... I think about, like, the... Like I know we're talking more about Seattle stuff now, but like just like the light rail, right? Like where they put up all they increase the car tab prices, right? It's like my house is never going to reap the benefits of that, right? It's never going to even stop because the budget constraints, right? So it's never even going to make a stop near my house. Yet I'm being, my tabs literally tripled in the past few years because of it. And so yeah, the only way that you get this sort of stuff, is through involuntary coercion.
Yeah, I feel like this kind of person must, the one to share this, must live in a city or just think all cities are the same, in that they live in a city where it's very grid. Everything's maybe sort of straightforward and together. That Seattle is not like that. And Seattle's still a city, right? Like we're not even talking about self-driving cars that would operate on, longer stretches of road and like more like a self-driving car to a secluded area helps people in remote areas much more than a rail would, because there's no reason for a rail to go out into the middle of nowhere. Like, there's not a reason for the light rail to go to where you and I live, which isn't that far from the major metropolitan areas of Seattle. And the quote of the light rail, I think, is going to be expanded to Everett, which is like very far north, not really that important, but don't worry, it'll get there by 2040. That's their actual quote, and it's insane. So I don't know. It seems to me that like someone sharing this doesn't understand that self-driving cars are actually like, and making infrastructure for that is way more versatile and way more realistic in a landmass like the United States, where cities are much different than somewhere like Japan or Tokyo. In a place like that, building rail infrastructure makes sense because everything is tight knit together, and the way that the society and all that's condensed and populated is much more conducive to that. But the US is not built that way. And, maybe that's part of, they want cities that aren't built as cars as a default. But I mean, I guess my question would be, do you want that in every new city being built? Or are you like proposing demolishing existing cities and rebuilding them from scratch as this not cars as default model? And even still, I think that self-driving cars help you get between those kinds of places too. And I don't know. This one to me, it's not like necessarily a cringe in the sense that it's like a very bad policy. It's just, to me, it seems very wanton for more
myopic
thought.
Yeah. Cool. I don't have any more on this one. Do you?
No, go ahead.
All right. We'll move on to our next cringe. So in this cringe, for those of you that are listening and not watching, we've got a video, and it was posted on Twitter, and it's of this girl. I'd say she's probably between 7 to 10 years old, and it's a video of her demonstrating some proficiency firing handguns. And this person retweeted it and said, "What kind of madness is this?" And then obviously kind of got ratioed. And then he replied, "The replies on this thread are ridiculous. The absurdity of a young child showing off her proficiency with guns seems to be lost on people." And I had to make sure this wasn't like he wasn't being funny, because that's just such a ridiculous take to me. He was not. He is a big anti-gun guy, and unironically was saying it's bad for a girl to be able to demonstrate proficiency with firearms.
Well, Britt, don't you know that the patriarchy thrives off of women being able to shoot guns? And so a young girl being able to show that she can defend herself is actually helpful to the patriarchy, because women shouldn't be able to defend themselves. Hold on, let me do the math here. I'm trying to... I would imagine this person probably white knights. Maybe that's not the most forgiving term to use for advocates for women's safety and stuff like that, and would be ready to accuse men of being predatory on women and things like that. And so it's like you're besmirching like a young girl who can defend herself against these kinds of evils that you would at least ascribe to hate and swear off yourself.
What's just crazy to me is like he's saying like he admits that she's proficient. That kind of cringes me out, because if any of you have seen this video, she's like double shooting, like she's got two pistols, like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix or John Wick, and that's kind of cringe. It's like that's not how you should learn to shoot a gun.
No.
But he's like, oh, her proficiency with guns is like, so you're admitting she's really like proficient with them, even though he knows nothing, obviously. And it's like, and you're also calling that absurd. It's like, so you just don't like the fact that she's able to defend herself. That's the only conclusion I can get from this, is like, you're angry that she's proficient at using a weapon that can defend herself.
It seems to me that he's angry that she can use that kind of weapon to defend herself. But again, then you just go to the sort of the ridiculous argument step back. You're like, okay, so you would rather her be proficient with a less efficient weapon to defend herself. You would rather her be skilled in a way that is not as effective in defending yourself. And it's funny because they'll try to take up the, I would imagine, again, just the logical next point might be to take up sort of, well, where does it stop? What if she's proficient with a machine gun and degrees up, or nukes or whatever? But there's always a level of efficiency that, for one thing, if you're just talking about it from sort of a pure effectiveness standpoint, where it's like Well, no, I don't think she needs to be proficient in dropping nukes because that's not very effective in defending yourself for self-defense. And and you know, a machine gun, maybe not. Like, it might not be as effective for a little girl to know how to do that, but that's also not what you're cringing at right here either, right?
Yeah. But even if she was like, I mean, that's the whole thing about gun culture, at least from what all the people that I've surrounded myself with, is like, proficiency just doesn't just mean like, oh, I know how to squeeze a trigger. It's I know all the different safety measures. And in this video, I mean, she checks that the one that she empties is empty, right? Like, and so and she's like, okay, it's cleared, awesome, great. And so even if like, let's just entertain all the way to the other end of the spectrum, like with nukes, right? Like, you would assume being proficient with a nuclear bomb would also mean like, I know how to build one, I know how to safely build it and manage it, and I know when I should not use it, right? That's the definition of proficiency, at least with weapons. And so in that case, right, like, I'd be okay with that. But the point is like, you don't need to have a nuclear bomb to be proficient at defending yourself on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And that just demonstrates this person doesn't even know the definition of proficiency with guns or what that all entails.
Yeah. Well, and I'm, you know, even if you're talking about like a machine gun or whatever, I wouldn't say it's, I might think it's overkill, but I wouldn't say it's absurd. And the fact that she would be proficient with it is great. Now she knows how to use it safely and won't, you know, these people think proficiency with a weapon means you can pull the trigger and you can go into a mall and spray down people. Wow, you're proficient with this weapon. And it's like the people who actually, you know, are using these things and learning from a young age, unless you're talking about like child labor slaves in Africa who are owned by a warlord, people learning from a young age are learning responsibly. It's not like someone's handing their kid a gun back and says, all right, take this to the mall with your friends, go shopping, you know, have some fun. It's not what's going on. So yeah, I think the absurdity of a young child showing off her proficiency with guns is that's good for her. She's awesome. Got a talent too, and she should be proud of that.
I personally really like it when anyone shows off proficiency with anything, because it means that they're skilled in it, right?
Exactly.
This guy talking down about it, like, that's not a good look either, man.
No.
Talk about patriarchy. All right, moving on to our next one. We have a blue check mark, Kate Kelly, and I don't really know what she does or who she is, but she's blue check mark, so we can say her name on the podcast. And she writes, rape did not exist among Native nations prior to white contact. I repeat, rape did not exist among Native nations prior to white contact. I actually had to look this up because this was such an absurd claim that I was like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it made me double check it. And all I had to do was say, okay, like Aztec sacrifice, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, they did that. You know, all the different native populations had some crazy element of rape culture in there, and sometimes even worse than like the default European rape culture. So yeah, just absurd. What an absurd, weird take.
Well, here's the thing: every non-native historian who's writing down the cultures and stuff, they're just getting it wrong, right? You see, that's the white man imposing his guilt and subjugating it. Subjugating the natives to his idea of what they are, the savage, primitive ideas. So really, there was no actual rape because it was just the projection of the white man. And so you don't have to trust any historian or historiography that's written by a white man because it's just projection. Everything before white, contact was good, happy, and it was Western civilization that came in and ruined this perfect Eden and paradise.
Yeah, I mean, there's this kind of a racist idea called like the noble savage, right? And that's kind of what Kate Kelly's doing right now. Is like, it's like, man, like I don't know, human nature to me seems pretty consistent across all peoples, regardless of race, color, or geography. I can't remember. I when I googled it, there was because you think about like when you watch Braveheart, right? Like you've got prima nocta, right, where the nobility takes the Scottish women and rapes them, and it's like, oh yeah, that was also practiced by like the Maori in New Zealand, right? Like when I was looking at it, so it's like there's a lot of and I'm not saying this in any like rejoicing way. I'm just saying it's like human nature is human nature across all spectrums, and it's kind of an awful thing to like apply that noble savage racist thing. And then also like veil yourself in that like I'm not racist, right? And it's just white man's burden.
Yeah, I don't really understand what the point of making this claim is, because I think even if you were to make the argument that Western imperialism is bad, and it's an interesting discussion with a lot of facets, and I would say in general, sort of colonial expansionism is often very harmful, and it's one of those things where, you kind of have to weigh out certain, how things went down, and I don't think you or I would say that in particular the U.S. or other European nations, the kinds of imperialism and colonialism that they engaged in was all justified or good. But like one of the benefits of those of what might be a bad situation is that you at least do bring some standard of morality or upward, right? Or what most people today would accept, even if you disagree with the fundamental sort of Judeo-Christian values of morality, such as like don't harm your neighbor, then maybe you'll have a problem with this take. But like, to me, it's one of those things where, even if everything about the colonialism was bad, even if, let's assume nothing about it was right or good, the silver lining is that a lot of the savage practices that were truly horrific ended. That's not to say rape ended, because obviously that's an unfortunate reality that's in every culture. But all that to say, I don't understand why, even if you're trying to sort of decry this colonialism or this imperialism of the white man, why you would just make up something so demonstrably false. It undermines your entire case, and it makes nothing what you say get taken seriously, rather than at least part of it. If you deconstruct and say, look, we have to look at the trade-offs of colonialism. Like, I'm not justifying the actions of going in and like burning savage and stealing their land just so we can impose our values on them. But let's be real and say that, if we're going to be living in a society, we probably want to be living in a society where the Western values are the ones that are in place, rather than savage ones where if you're a woman, you're literally treated as garbage in many cases, or as property, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all part of kind of that weird intersectional philosophy. The same one that like, has these people rooting for countries that literally will throw, if you're gay or LGBTQ, like will throw people off roofs like that, right? It's like, okay, like I get it. We shouldn't be going in there and bombing people or anything like that. But at the same time, you shouldn't be like venerating that culture. That's based on your values, based on our values, based on a value that values human life and respect and voluntarism. Like, that's not a good thing. But it's all caught up. It's really the modern day racism, right? Like, it's just these people. It's like, white equals bad, brown equals good, and we're going to make all of our judgment calls based off of that, and literally rewrite history like this person is trying to do.
Yep, that's all I've got for that one. Unless you've got anything else.
Nah, I don't. All right, moving on to our next one. So we've got an NBC News article. I think this was yesterday. And they posted, Florida First Lady Casey Desantis has been diagnosed with breast cancer. And they posted an article about it. And then when I saw this, I was like, man, there's going to be some nasty comments underneath it. And so I opened it up, and lo and behold, literally, I think it was like the fifth or sixth one down, this person wrote, "Karma. Too bad he didn't have testicular cancer instead of her having breast cancer. He's the one that truly deserves it." That's just ugly. What an ugly thing to say.
It's rough, because on the one hand, I understand the impulse that like politicians should fear us. But I also understand that politicians are humans, and like, I don't know, especially when you're talking about someone's wife who is, not dictating whatever edicts you disagree with. I start to get hesitant, and especially when it's a politician like Desantis, who his major crime is that he's not locked people down. He's not prevented them from living their lives. And it's one of these people who's absolutely psycho, who thinks that the lockdowns had anything to do with the spread or intensity of COVID-19, which is an absurd thing to think when you look at stats and data. But of course, people don't do that when they make wild, horrible comments like, "Too bad he doesn't have testicular cancer, but karma for her having breast cancer."
Yeah, and I think it, like, obviously, you and I both don't really like any sort of governmental politician that has unilateral ability to control our lives. But regardless, it's like I think this speaks to the bigger narrative, right? Because I see these comments on, because NBC or any of these people will post news articles about, like some conservative in Alabama that denied COVID died from COVID-19, last week or whatever. And you go in there and people are just cheering it on, right? Normal people. It's like, whoa, this is ugly. You and I've talked about the Jimmy Kimmel, segment where, they're literally applauding him and laughing when he's like, oh, people that don't have the vaccine should be denied health care. And, you see then, like, there's a person here at UW, University of Washington Medical Center, that needs a life-saving heart not transplant, but like a valve replaced for them. And the doctors came and said, hey, we're not gonna actually do this procedure until you get vaccinated, simply because we just don't want to have you here in the hospital if you're not vaccinated. And so he got bumped out of the list, to have that procedure done, and is currently still awaiting and at the end of that list. So it's like a lot of these things have real implications for normal people that aren't politicians, right? And this person's the spirit of this person's post, I think, doesn't just extend to Casey Desantis. It extends to everyone, right? And that's kind of the weird, cringy thing about it. It's like, well, if it saves one life, except if they don't have my political ideology.
Yeah, in another kind of funny way, it does also take away her agency, right? Like this assumption that she's even supported anything that he's done. I mean, she puts on a public face, but if you're so dumb that to believe that a politician's spouse agrees with 100% of what the politician does, you probably just don't really think about the fact that these are individual humans who know that they have to put on a face for the public and then go behind and disagree. And it's like, a principled wife would have stood up to him on this issue or something. And I think that that's a stupid claim at best. And obviously, even at worst, like, okay, so let's say that, let's say it's the reverse. Let's say DeSantis actually imposed lockdowns and he absolutely, prevented people from living their lives, and she opposed that, but she didn't say anything or whatever. I still wouldn't wish her to get, breast cancer, even if I'm disappointed that she didn't publicly speak out against, lockdowns. It's like, okay, but she's not even the one instituting it, even if she is sitting by, and I'm disappointed that she didn't do more. So, I don't think there's any justification for being happy with some kind of karma harm. You have to be a very, very sick human. It just makes me think of dystopian fiction where people start out sort of humanitarian, and then as things get worse and worse, you become a little bit more cutthroat, and it's like, oh man, Governor DeSantis is doing this evil thing of letting COVID spread. So now I'm okay with his wife being, in a deadly disease thing to punish him, and you're like, oh, wow, okay. We've gotten all the way there.
Did you see that ad that they're running against DeSantis?
I don't know. It sounds familiar, but I don't recall.
You gotta watch it. I thought it was satire. It's not. I thought it was maybe even an ad that DeSantis made for himself, like to be funny. But basically, like it's kind of like a riff on The Purge. And so these people are on this plane and they're flying into Florida. It's like, you're now arriving in Florida, and you have the right to infect anyone you want with COVID, and you are now subject to Governor. You're now subject to Governor DeSantis' decrees. Here's a word from him, and it's like the little thing crackles on the screen, like, oh, DeSantis, and he's speaking, and literally, I'm not joking. The first thing that they want to say that like is his bad like take or whatever, he says, we just believe that we can trust people to make the right decisions, and they're making that like, dude, you gotta watch it. It's hilarious. I'll send it to you after we're done with this. It's so funny. I thought it was parody, but it's not. Like, it's a legit like organization that's trying to take him down, and they're like doing all these things of like, it's just. So anyways, it's just crazy how much they hate that guy, and yeah, he's a governor and all that, but regardless, he's done a decent job from what I understand in Florida, in terms of keeping everyone their rights protected and not caving to the greater narrative, and doing what the people of Florida apparently want too, right? Because they elected him. So yeah, it's crazy the animus that they've got towards it, and it's always really sad when it spills over to people having this weird and ugly take of like, oh, good, his wife is suffering. That's just an awful thing. You shouldn't wish on anyone.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but what that ad that you're saying and that misquote really makes me think. I don't know if you've seen this debate that happened in Virginia. So there's a governor's race going on there between Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin. And Terry McAuliffe had been governor. Virginia law is that if you're governor, you can be governor, but you can't run for a consecutive term. But you can run again after that. So it's been 4 years. He's not governor, so he's running again to become governor. And Glenn Youngkin attacks him on this one on school stuff, where he's like, Terry McAuliffe vetoed this bill that would have alerted parents if there were sexually explicit books in the kindergarten, like the ones they found. And he just doesn't, he doesn't believe in empowering parents to make these decisions for their kids and stuff. And then Terry McAuliffe responds. And again, it sounds like he's like writing an ad for Glenn Youngkin, where he goes, first of all, this just shows how out of touch he is and how he hasn't done anything. The bill was that it would have allowed parents to remove those books. It wasn't that it was going to let them know that they were there. They could know they were there. So at first it's like, oh, cool. So they could know the porn books are in their kindergartner's library, but you just can't remove them. Okay, thank you.
Oh my
gosh. Then he goes, and this is the kicker. He goes, it would have allowed parents to remove the books from the library. And I just don't think parents should be telling schools what they should be teaching. I just don't think the parents should be telling the schools what to do with the kids.
I did see that. Oh
and
my
it's
gosh.
Well, sound clip that, and that's your ad. You do not need anything else. Literally. I mean, and so in the same way that is, like, it's the opposite. It's like, they're like, oh, wait, Ron DeSantis thinks that people can be free to make their own decisions? No. We're much more in the Terry McAuliffe camp. We don't want parents, lording over their children, telling schools what they should be teaching. Goodness.
Yeah, that's disturbing, man, that some of the people that are in power or are seeking power really do believe that those points are ones that resonate with the general population.
Well, and then, of course, in our own state, Governor Inslee.
They do.
Well, yeah. Did you hear the Governor Inslee quote, too, just from, like this last week?
I don't think I heard it.
Oh, man. I need to find it exactly, but... he says something along the lines of, sometimes there's only one person who can save Washington from like this thing, and I'm that person right now. Like,
gosh!
He says something to that. I need to find. I'll pull it up when we move on to the next cringe here. But let me pull it up.
Dude, that's
we'll find
that's so cringy. Oh my gosh. Man, watching him in the debates was like something else. He was just so bad. He's so unlikable. And he was going to be a single issue presidential debate person with the Green New Deal and all this stuff. It's just, it's so cringy. You find it?
I found an article talking about it. I'm trying to find the exact. Oh, here we go. Okay. This is what he said. So a TV host questioned Inslee about the emergency declarations. Because for those of you who are not aware, Inslee's basically been governing by executive order. He's not been passing laws. We haven't had a legislative session do this. He's operating fully on emergency powers that he's stretching them well beyond their intended use. So a TV host questioned Inslee about the dozens of legal challenges to his executive authority. Inslee responded, "There is only one person in the state of Washington who has the capability to save those lives right now, and it happens to be the governor of the state of Washington."
Oh, and he did refer to himself in the third person.
Yes. I do have to say, I'm going to give a little shout out to my colleague who's quoted in this article, Jason Mercier. In this random web article I just pulled up, we are being governed by press conference. The executive has to have emergency powers, but it should be time limited, non-definite. We can disagree there, but I mean, regardless, it was man. It's like, yeah, he's literally been meeting and saying, here's what you're allowed to do today, or here's what you can't do today. It really has been governing by press conference, but it's okay because only he can save us, Britt. Only Governor Inslee.
Oh, save us, Inslee. Man, that is ugly and cringy.
All that being said, I still don't wish testicular cancer on him, okay?
I don't either. Man, yeah. Or his wife. I don't know if he's married or not, but...
He is, he is. But yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah. Yeah, I would never wish that on them, as much as I dislike him and everything that he's doing. That's just, man, what a... for all of you guys listening, like, you got some bonus cringes there, so go ahead and look those up. You might not be able to see the post, but... We've mentioned them. You got any more on this one?
No. After my little tangent, I think I'm good.
All right. So this is our final cringe of the day, and it's kind of a 2-for-1 because there's kind of a pretty low hanging fruit, and then there's a little bit more high hanging fruit here. So the first, these are replies to a Dr. Jordan B. Peterson and Michael Malice tweet. So Dr. Jordan B. Peterson first tweeted out, "How about my rights will not be made subject to your emergency?" Pretty good take. And then Michael Malice has an even better take that says, "Getting closer, Dr. J. My rights are not up for discussion, let alone a vote." And so the low-hanging fruit, someone tweeted out, "Not sure if Michael Malice is aware, but our rights are in fact up for discussion and a vote. They created a constitutional amendment process for just that reason. Sure, it's extremely hard to do, but there is a process."
I didn't know
Michael Malice didn't even know. Oh gosh.
I think there's a lot to like about this low-hanging fruit, but my favorite thing that just jumped out on me on this reading of it is he says they created a constitutional amendment. He doesn't reference anyone. He just says they. It's like, you know what they say? They created a constitution. Who? The gods? Like, who is they? And like, why do you care about what they think? I mean, I'm almost coming full around to like those leftist arguments against constitutional rights and protections, but to their credit, when they say, who cares about what, they'd probably say, a bunch of racist white men think. My thought is, who cares what anyone else thinks about my rights? The only reason I care about the Constitution and its amendability is insofar it's going to protect my natural rights. That's why I like the Constitution. Not because there's anything innate about it, not because they created a process of amendments. It's because it recognizes the natural rights that are already there.
It's like insert sure, the Constitution currently says that you can't be put in a concentration camp and exterminated, and but there's an amendment process. And yeah, it's extremely hard to amend that and make it possible, but there is a process for it. It's like, oh, okay, dude, like oh, man.
Not sure if you're aware, Britt. I'm not sure if you're aware.
Yeah, they can't amend. Gosh. So low-hanging fruit, pretty funny. And then Eric Weinstein, he's a blue check mark, and he's brothers with Brett Weinstein, who's actually from here in Washington, right, at Evergreen College, and they had that.
Oh yeah. No, that is right. Yep, I did know that. That's right.
So they did the whole thing there. So they're sometimes good on stuff, sometimes not. I mean, they are pretty, for the most part, anti-authoritarian, which makes them okay. But Eric kind of had a cringy thing here. That's a little bit more. That's not cringy. It's just a little bit more nuanced, and I think it's kind of an interesting discussion for us to have. So Eric replied to this. He said, "Universally incompetent and or unethical leadership is breeding a societal backlash so profound that we may soon no longer be able to conscript an army even when under direct attack. The above is intended simply as an observation, not a perspective or a judgment. Just think, ... Obviously replying to Jordan's and Michael Malice's tweets. And this is kind of like, I found this interesting because this is kind of the chief argument that I run into when I'm talking with any sort of person that is kind of anti-authoritarian, and I'm trying to convince them to become an anarchist, or in general, is that, okay, well, sure, I agree, we shouldn't have government and healthcare, and we should have free markets all over the place and everything, but we need to have a strong national defense, and if we didn't have this or that, then China would invade and it would all be over. So I thought this would be an interesting one for us to kind of engage with. The part where that made me cringe was the conscript an army, even when under direct attack. I was like, conscript. Every time I go to the post office and I see the draft sign that says "Do the right thing, sign up for the draft," I kind of cringe, and this reminded me of it.
Yeah, what I'll say is I do think, and maybe this reflects a thought or not. His little bottom part is sort of, he's like, I'm just throwing this out there, and maybe he really isn't making a judgment like he's claiming. So at the very best, maybe he's just throwing this out, saying that, like, even if we wanted to conscript an army, we could not. And I feel like there are overtones of this being a negative, but maybe he is just sort of throwing it out as sort of a thought discussion, and I guess my thought is it's like, well, goodness, I mean, at the point where we have half of the country wishing testicular cancer on the other half, I mean, are they really going to be any less dangerous than like some hypothetical foreign invasion we have to conscript an army for? I don't know. I do wonder, like, so much of the effectiveness of the U.S. military, if you can call it that, has been in its voluntary nature and voluntary status. And so when you're bringing up how much backlash and how much strife there is sort of in the national sentiment, you almost wonder if the effectiveness of an army is really worn away, regardless of conscription, regardless of that. Maybe the idea, which we've talked about before, of a national divorce, right, of sort of a splitting up of the U.S. states, really would be a huge benefit in the sense that I think at least, the willing and able people from some of the divisions would gladly ally and defend if there was some sort of land invasion. This other one, right? But maybe this group would also not be willing to like join in when it's a matter of bombing brown kids overseas because you think you have some intel on a guy who once said, I don't like the US very much. So I think that it's funny because as I'm thinking through this and talking over it, it's almost like, yeah, if we can't conscript an army because we're not under one unified, leadership, we probably would be able to get a volunteer force for self-defense if someone started attacking us regardless, But conscripting an army to go fight a foreign war that we actually don't feel like is necessary, yeah, that may actually not be possible.
That may be difficult.
That might be a good thing,
Yeah, he gets some of it right? It's like, you're like, yeah, there is universally incompetent leadership at the top of this country. And even if you had the smartest person in the world at the top, they still would be incompetent by the standards of being able to run everything because there's just no way to run everything. Even if you knew every single thing about everything, things change so fast, and there's no way you can actually make the best decision for 330 million people, with all the different geography and societal and cultural and, religious, all these different dynamics that play into it. The only way you can make good decisions, or you can't make good decisions, the only way those things play out naturally and in the best and most efficient way is if you have, you outsource it to the masses, right? And in free markets. And so he kind of gets that right? Like, I view that as a good thing. Like, yeah, the less we trust our government, the more we view them as incompetent and unable to take care of us and make us safe and all that stuff, the better off we're going to be. And just like you were saying, if we were under direct attack, if North Korea showed up on, at ocean shores or on the Oregon coast or something like that, I don't think you would have a very hard time getting, you or I or anyone to go defend ourselves, right, if that was the case. But the reality is, I think we've only, on the mainland USA, I think we've only ever had one encounter with a foreign power. I think it was with the Japanese, and I think it was on the West Coast. And they had the Japanese submarine had strayed off into somewhere. So that's insanely rare, almost never happens. And we were already at war with them, so I guess that's kind of a moot point.
I mean, I guess the British burning us down, it was very early on, but
Sure. You know what I'm saying, though? Like in modern day, post us being founded in the War of 1812 and all that.
Yeah.
But go for it. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, we could also, you or I would step up, and I think also the girl dual wielding the pistols would probably help step up.
Would. I'd be happy she's proficient.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully she is really proficient with the Keanu Reeves dual wielding, because
if maybe we're in the Matrix right now, and we really are, the blue pill, red pill analogies are more real, and she is Keanu, because if that's the case, I want to be on her side. I want to be on her team. Take the red pill.
Yes.
Well,
and that's kind of what's funny about this though is most status, whenever they bring up something like this, how would we ever conscript an army, or how would we ever, if there's a natural disaster, mobilize, resources to that place? It's if that happened, the free market naturally does that, right? It provides that because there's a societal need. People see it, and they either A, know that it's essential for their survival, and they're convinced of it, or B, they're able to see that there's some profit or capital or benefit to be gained, so they're going to mobilize it there, right? And that's like the beautiful thing about like price controls for like natural disaster, right? Is like people are incentivized to bring goods to a place they otherwise would never have done it because there's now more profit incentive there, right? And so like the equilibrium's there. And so everything that these people bring, if you're like a minarchist, like all the objections they bring, it assumes it's like, well, if there's a societal need for it, society usually provides for it, right? Entrepreneurs provide for it, or people step up and do it.
Well, that's it. This parallels our conversations on the COVID vaccine in many ways, where it's like if this, if the mortality rate of COVID was high enough, you wouldn't have to coerce people into taking this vaccine, or if it was effective enough for all these different reasons, people would voluntarily step up and do it. And as the case is, it's just not worth the risk for many people right now. So it's kind of that similar thing, but the funny thing I always encounter is people think, well, everyone, if you don't conscript a military, if you don't volunteer, if you don't have this sense of national pride to have people volunteer or whatever, no one will do it because they're all selfish. And my thought is, one, I think I generally do trust people to do the right thing in many cases, especially when it comes to sort of big picture macro things like that. Like, a foreign power invades, I expect there will be lots of cowards. I also expect there will be lots of people who step up and realize that there's things worth fighting for. And maybe that takes someone being at your doorstep or whatever, but, when push comes to shove, it happens. So there's sort of that good nature that you might rely on for that. But even if you believe that all humans are this selfish, depraved, realize that, like, the people who have resources and are wealthy, they want to preserve the land just as much as, like, it's selfish to be cowardly, but it's also selfish to want to defend your way of life, your home, your people around you, your business, all these kinds of things. And even, what good is it if you survive in your little dome and everything else around you is destroyed? Or even if your mansion is protected, but there's no one left there to buy your goods, So even if from the self-interest standpoint, upon which capitalism relies and human nature is, largely based on, you have incentives to defend yourself and your homeland, as it were. And the last thing I will say is that not only is, I would say, this national identity pride that makes our current, military, a volunteer basis so strong, I think you get more of that when you have local communities and you actually have smaller areas that you feel a real connection to. I think a lot of the American identity and pride that the conservatives tend to have and tend to rely on, it's very forced. And it's not to say it's all a bad thing, right? Like, I'm not one of those angsty people who's like, oh, America sucks all the time, and like, you shouldn't be proud to be an American or whatever. But I don't buy into the mythos necessarily either. I don't, the Pledge of Allegiance to me is kind of weird, for instance. I think that's a very odd thing to do. But a lot of this mythos is based on a history of forefathers and all these values that look nothing like the America of today. And so they're clinging on to something that isn't really there, in a sense, and only was there at one point. And so it's like you divide and you have this unethical leadership split up your countries, and you sort of break down the federalism of the U.S. and you bring it down to smaller and local levels. And you actually start developing more pride and more of this, like, responsibility to your community and to your peers and whatnot, because there are the associations that you have locally around you. And that can be an association of geography as well as values or other, heck, part of it's like, people in the modern day, like, connecting with someone over the internet and, like, making a meaningful friendship and connection. And it's like, gosh, well, if my friend over, on the other side of the states is facing a foreign invasion, I might fly out to go help them, even if I'm not required to, because I care about the connection I've voluntarily made. It's not even geographically based, but I mean,
we saw that, right? Like with the whole Afghanistan deal, when they pulled out, and they obviously botched getting some of the people that they'd promised to get out. And all these different private military people that were former military or current or had just recently left that had friends, right, that they'd met, or, translators and families like that were left behind, they came over and got these people out, via private means. And they did things that the government and the United States military, for all of its, money and power and resources, was not able to do. And obviously maybe there's some political element to it, but regardless, it's like you're saying, these people risked everything they had, and they came over and helped people, get out of Afghanistan. like you're saying, because they had made some sort of connection, right? And humans are, I like to look at it from the perspective that humans are capable of such good deeds, right? And even if they're not capable of it, like you're saying, like they can still see the incentives and the actions that they take and how it affects them. And how, kind of like game theory, right? Like if we all try to fit through the door at the same time, none of us are going to get through, right? And at its base level motivation, humans have got that and can see that. And so, so Eric Weinstein, if we ever had a foreign, invader that showed up on our shores, or at least in Washington, I think it would be pretty easy to conscript. Not even conscript. I don't think you'd have to conscript. People would just join up voluntarily.
Totally agree.
Awesome. You're good on that. I think you said that was the last
good.
one. That's my last take, too. So awesome. Well, friends, thanks for hanging out with us tonight. If we said anything that made you cringe, be sure to let us know. You can follow us at Cringe Post Pod. Those are all our socials for Instagram, Twitter, you name it. You can also check us out at cringepost.com. Like I said earlier in the episode, we totally thrive off of your guys' support and sharing and all that stuff. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe our show. And we'll be back later this week with more Cringe Posts for you. Take care.
See you next time.